Good evening, everybody. And this is going to be Fire Up Wisconsin, and it's going to be a different type of broadcast tonight. We are doing a dedication and we're tributing this whole show to Mr. Baseball, none other than Bob Uecker. For those of you that don't know who Bob Uecker is, and honestly, I don't know who you could possibly be because he was a national figure. Like he started out. Let's start back. Take a way back. He was born January 26, 1934. He started out as an American professional baseball catcher. He was in the major leagues. I think it was all of 6 seasons, and we'll get into a little bit more. Then he was a sportscaster who served as play-by-play announcer for the Milwaukee Brewers of Major League for 54 seasons. And he was an occasional television and film actor, and he did commercials like Miller Lite commercials, for those to be exact, because as Eric will tell you, because a Hankey's been there's the tribute growing at Miller at what I affectionately call it Miller Park. It's now American Family Fields.
It's been in Miller Park for up until recently, up for over like 20 plus years, and everyone knows it as Miller Park. Just it was that way for over 20 plus years, and eventually it just it's the same ballpark, just different name.
It is, exactly. But unfortunately, we lost him last week. 90 years old, 10 days shy of 91, actually.
Yeah.
Highlighter Man Sports. Hello. Good evening. Eric Katz and Candy. Yes.
Yep.
We are talking a tribute to Bob Uecker. He signed with his hometown Milwaukee Braves back in 1956, spending several years in the minor leagues. So he actually, and I didn't know this, he actually was a pitcher when he very first started baseball, and then he switched to a catcher. I didn't know that. Did you know that, Eric, that he started out as a pitcher?
No, I did not. I always knew of him as a catcher. Of course, he joked about his very short playing career very, very frequently.
Well, he did, and especially now we'll kind of fast forward and then bring it back, but he actually is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he joked during his induction speech that he should have gone in as a player. He is not in as a player. He only played 6 seasons, but he's in as a broadcaster, which is just awesome. But
yes, he's a not just obviously Milwaukee. He's iconic in the same light as, say, we have some pretty notable actors here like Chris Farley. He's kind of in that light because Wisconsin's got some notable Wisconsin lights in Hollywood. Willem Dafoe. I mean, he's kind of held up into that light where he's like just timeless. He's like, I think, the last broadcaster that was truly able to connect generations of fans in the same light that Vin Scully was able to during his very long run with the Los Angeles and Brooklyn Dodgers. And he connected with with generations of fans on so many fronts. People like when I was at the ballpark for the tribute, when we were able to sign the banner and get him and be able to kind of whatever the deal is with that, whatever's going to happen with that. We were, it just, people old and young were at the ballpark signing this banner. Like, you saw countless stories on there of his time, doing Game of the Week with Howard Cosell. You also heard stories about, him being on the Johnny Carson show, or him being in his various movies like Major League, where he was just, that's just Bob being Bob at that point. And at the statue, which I actually have a picture of it right now, and I'd love to be able to share it because I took it before I left. Everybody was giving away things. Like, I put a baseball there. People gave away Miller Lite cans there. So in some cases they were full, and I would imagine by now, since it's 1 degree outside, the beer is probably frozen. There's jerseys. There's all sorts of stuff people gave away at that statue. I mean, it was very surreal, and they also made the ballpark blue and had kind of Bob's face on there, because Bob connected with fans. I used to, whenever I would be going places, I would have Bob Uecker on in the car all the time when I was running errands, listening to the game. It was one people just, if you just said Bob in Milwaukee, people knew. because there's only one guy who's truly known as Bob in Milwaukee, and that was Bob Uecker.
One of the quotes, I would say Bud Selig, who used to be the commissioner baseball, he said that Bob Uecker was the soul of the Milwaukee Brewers.
Absolutely.
And honestly, so for those of you that don't know this, he broadcast the games via radio for years, for 54 years to be exact. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know like another broadcaster that to do that. Like, I've never listened to another one. I've always listened to Bob Uecker, and you'd hear his voice, and he invited himself into your house, but like you welcomed him with open arms, like, and you would listen to this broadcast, and you felt like you were right there. He had a way of telling stories, and I've done a lot of reading about him over the last couple days. And one of the things that a lot of sportscasters have said is that nothing of his is scripted. He comes in with nothing written down. He just comes in. He just tells you stories. Like he's talking to you directly. Like he's having a one-on-one conversation. Like you and I are, Eric, right now. We're having a one-on-one conversation. And that's what he would do with thousands of people that were listening. And you wouldn't think like there was this whole big, crowd. It's just crazy to think all that he so did you know that he was actually in the Army as well?
I did, and I think it was around the time when everyone was kind of getting drafted and all that. So like pretty much like at the time when that happened, it was pretty much 1 in 4 felt like in the country at that point in time, 1 in 4 people got drafted. So it was a lot of notable people at that point in time were a part of the armed forces.
Yes. He actually enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1954, ultimately achieving the rank of corporal. He played baseball while at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri and Fort Belvoir in Virginia, where he was teammates with his fellow future major leaguer Dick Groat. And then when he came back in 56 is when he actually started. He signed a professional contract with his hometown Milwaukee Braves.
He did.
He played in the minors for long times. But even though he only had a short playing career, he actually was in the World Series. Now, he didn't actually play in the game, but he was part of the World Series team that won.
Yes, the one I think Hank Aaron was on that team as well. I think that was like up until the Bucks winning it. That was the last championship that came to Milwaukee at that for the longest time. It
was the 1964 World Series champions with the Cardinals. He was with the Cardinals at that point.
Okay. Yeah, the Cardinals. Yeah, that was beat my Yankees in 7, I believe. With Bob, the craziest thing about Bob too was he would always do his broadcast on a handshake agreement with Bud Selig and then later Mark Antanasio, who owns the team now. And it wasn't until recently that he actually signed something because his acting union folded. And so he still wanted to get healthcare benefits. So that was the first contract he ever signed with the Brewers. The rest of the time, it was a handshake agreement, and he would show up for however many games he felt like doing, which although he wasn't really traveling as much, it was pretty much his booth. If he wanted to do the game, he could. And Bob for a while was the thing to listen to with the Brewers, because there was a long time from about 83 up until I think 2008 where the Brewers are just unwatchable. They weren't very good. But people still listen to Bob because Bob made it entertaining.
He did. He did. He had stories. He actually started his broadcasting career back in 1971. His tenure as a Brewers broadcast for 54 seasons was the second longest continuous tenure with one team among active Major League baseball announcers prior to his death, trailing only Kansas City Royals broadcaster Denny Matthews, which he started in 69 till the present. Uecker has done University of Wisconsin games, Milwaukee Panthers, basketball, football games. He's one of the things that I thought was really interesting is you talk about Pensman. Yes, Eric is a Yankees fan, but he lives in Milwaukee or around Milwaukee. So
I support the local team as well.
yes.
I'm not the diehard, but I do support them, and am happy when they do well. And lately, past few years of Brewers fans have been spoiled with them going to the postseason. What seems like it's starting to become a birthright every year.
It's funny because as we're in the college football playoffs is starting at soon, and NFL playoffs are obviously going underway.
Yep.
And they talk about the coaching tree and how like the OCs become head coaches and the coaching tree of, Bill Belichick and how it hasn't done well, and Andy Reid, it hasn't done well.
And
but
Andy Reid's had some guys in there.
He has. So, the interesting thing is Bob Uecker has his own tree, and Bob Uecker mentored Pat Hughes, Jim Powell, Corey Povis, Joe Block, and that's just to name a few. He's like talked to a lot of other people. He's teamed with Bob Costas, Joe Morgan. He's done All-Star games. He's done World Series. He's done a lot. I was like crazy when I was seeing all the different people he's worked with, and so Pensman, he is a Brewer. He's a Yankees fan first and foremost, but Brewers because it's the local team, and it's not a bad team to latch onto. They don't play the Yankees very often anymore. I mean, obviously now with interleague play, but
it's a little more often now. But for a long time, like you maybe when interleague play was that period of time in June, you might get them like once every few years, but nowadays, now the National League and the American League kind of play each other a lot more frequently than they used to. So, but there's not really. But with the Brewers being in the National League, switching over from the American League to the National League, they didn't play each other much.
Well, they used to play each other a lot more when they played in the American League because I remember them coming more. But yes,
yeah.
The other thing we haven't talked about is Uecker acting. So he actually played the character and father of sports writer George Owens on the 85 to 1990 sitcom Mr. Belvedere. And then he made cameo appearances as himself in the films OC and Stiggs, Fatal Instinct, and in episodes of the sitcoms Who's the Boss, DC Follows, Late Line. He was the voice of head of Bob Uecker in the Futurama episode of Alila and Her Own. And of course, we can't forget the movie. What's the movie that he...
Major League.
Yes.
He also was still acting and still active as of 2021 when he did a Disney Plus series called Monsters at Work. So he was still, even well into his life, he was still acting, not nearly as often, but he would still get some parts here and there. But that's the great thing about him, was he was able to connect to all generations of life, where people might remember him one thing, and then the kids might see him in another show and know him there.
Mm-hmm. So some of the honors that he's had. He's in the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Association, named Uecker as Wisconsin Sportscaster of the Year 5 times, 77, 79, 81, 82, and 87, and inducted him into its Hall of Fame in 2011. He was inducted to the National Radio Hall of Fame in 2001. In 2003, he received the Ford Frick Award, bestowed annually by the Baseball Hall of Fame to a broadcaster for major contributions to baseball. In 2005, Uecker's 50th year in professional baseball, the Milwaukee Brewers placed a number 50 in his honor in their Ring of Honor, retired the numbers of Robin Yount and Paul Molitor. 4 years later, on May 12th, 2009, Uecker's name was also added to the Brewers Wall of Honor inside American Family Field.
Yes.
Here's something I bet you a lot of people don't know. Uecker was inducted into the celebrity wing of the WWE Hall of Fame in 2010, honored for his appearances at WrestleMania 3 and WrestleMania 4.
That sounds like Uecker.
Doesn't it? On August 31st.
That's just something he'd do.
I know. It's crazy. On
Mhm.
August 31st, 2012, the Brewers erected a Uecker monument outside American Family Field alongside statues of Hank Aaron, Robert Yount, and Bud Selig. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers declared September 25th, 2021 as Bob Uecker Day in honor of his 50th year broadcasting Brewer games.
Mhm.
He threw out the first pitch against the New York Mets, but instead of throwing the ball to the catcher, he unveiled a pitching machine and used that. Before the game, left fielder Christian Yelich presented a gift on behalf of the players, a pair of custom Nike sneakers with Air Uecker and his famous get up on one foot and one of us and just a bit outside on the other hand. So if you don't know, he's famous for in Major League. He let me see. I thought
Harry Doyle.
Harry Doyle, yes. But one of the other things I want to see if I can play this for you guys. Let's see if I can.
Although there was a hilarious part where he was drinking, and then as the Cleveland, as the then Indians were doing well, he started getting more sober.
He did. That was so funny.
That's just something Bob Uecker would put in a movie. It was just totally just pure Bob Uecker at that point.
Yes, just a bit outside, and he actually wrote a book too.
He did.
He did.
Top of the sixth, and rookie sensation Ricky Vaughn on the pitch now. You can close the book on Kelder. Oh, thank God. Watch, we're only 4 runs now. We're still in this. You take it to him. Look, man, guy gets a second, first sign indicator. Vaughn, a juvenile delinquent in the offseason in his major league debut. Gonna light your ass up, Lee. Vaughn into the windup in his first offering. Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed.
That is his famous. He's famous for that. Just a bit outside.
And they still people still copy it to this day.
They do, of course.
It's just, Bob is just a revolutionary guy. He well, I think he got his wish though upon his passing was he was still technically employed by the time he passed, because that was his one hope in life, was to still be employed.
It was, and I'll be honest with you, like this, obviously this last year they didn't get as far as they wanted to. They were in the playoffs.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, they lost.
Heartbreaking
with your favorite player there, Mr. Eric, hitting a home run to beat them. But after the game, I thought, as I watched it, obviously on TV, and I'm like, there's just something off. There's something off when they were showing some of the celebrations and stuff like that. And what it was is that some people knew Bob Uecker, basically he had died of lung cancer.
Yeah.
And some people knew. And so I think some of them knew that it was the last time, like players like Christian Yelich, even though Christian didn't play in the game because he was hurt and had surgery.
Yeah.
He knew that was the last game. And Bob Uecker, he left it with, he goes, that one's going to sting a bit. But one of the other, so this is one of the legendary, let's see, this is his last call, I believe.
2 strikes, 1 out. The stretch. Jackson leads the pitch. Is hit over Cooper's head to right, a base hit. Here is Reggie turning second, trying for third. Moore's going to have a play on him. The throw in time to get him.
I actually have.
So let's go ahead.
I actually have a bobblehead. I'd be willing to get it. That has, if you press the button, it's all of some of Uecker's most iconic calls with the Brewers.
It is. It's crazy.
I don't hear it.
So yeah, that is his iconic call. Get up, get out of here,
Oh,
gone. And it's actually in the stadium.
It is.
It's on the slide.
It's on Bernie's slide. It's in the it's right if you go really, really high, they call it Bernie's lookout. It's like the last what Bob calls the last seat up there. It's right up, it's right upper left field.
Exactly. Yes. Pensman, I didn't know about I knew about the WWE, but I didn't
Neither did I. I mean, I'm not surprised that he did it, because that just sounds like he sounds right. He sounds like he fits right in with everyone in that in that place.
Well, and let's face it, if ever you have gone to Miller Park or now American Family Fields, there's actually seats that are named Uecker seats.
There are. There's also,
and they don't pre-sell them.
Mm-mm.
How much are they, Eric?
I don't know. I've never gone up there. I know that there's if you go all the way up there, there's a statue of Bob Uecker on a bench up there that you can sit there and take a photo, or whatever. I've never actually bought them, just because they're very special seats. You can't, and they're probably going to be harder to get now that he's passed. And like you ultimately have to I think you have to buy a special license to even get those seats.
Do you? I don't think so. I thought they're the cheapest seats because they're actually obstructed seats, and I thought.
Oh, I've never bought them, so I've never thought to buy them, just because they're not great.
They are not. But so since then, the farthest seats from the action in some arenas and stadiums have been jokingly called Uecker seats. There is a section of $1 seating called the Uecker seats at American Family Field baseball. So it'll be interesting to see if they keep them at $1. But yeah, because they were obstructed, so you can only partly see them, and they were way up in the back. But yeah, they were selling them for $1, and it was just. Go ahead, Eric.
To his credit, though, Mark Antonaccio has a very has appreciation for Brewers history, and I don't see them switching the dollar, especially with Uecker passing.
Exactly. I don't either. And I mean, it's not like it's a whole big section. There's only a couple of seats back there.
No.
But it'll be interesting to see who has the first call this year, and when there's a home run hit, if they pay tribute to Ueck and they call it the same way Ueck has called it all these years, or not.
It'll probably be Jeff Levering, who's in his own right is a terrific broadcaster for Milwaukee, who's been the guy with Uecker in the booth, whether Uecker's doing the game or not, whether he handles X innings or Uecker does Y innings. It's probably going to be Jeff Levering. I think he's just going to move to a more full-time schedule.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think is going to happen, but who knows?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I didn't know either, and for those of you that, and this is going to date me somewhat, but if ever you remember the Johnny Carson show, the Tonight Show, Bob Uecker actually made 100 guest appearances on that show. He's hosted Saturday Night Live during its 10th season on October 13th, 1984. He's obviously appeared in a series of Miller Lite commercials, which was funny. I can tell you that I think Marcus Theaters was bringing back Major League to honor him this week, and they were going to have some showings of Major League in the theater.
I love that movie.
That is a good movie.
It's very funny.
It is. And it's just so off the cuff for Bob. Like, it was just so natural for him to start talking about different stories. And it's kind of funny because as a sportscaster, you obviously talk about, you should know the history of the game and stuff like that.
Have to, yeah.
You do. And it's funny because Bob Uecker was great at calling games. And let's face it, the Brewers have not always had a really good team. And so it's really easy during the good times, right? But
Right.
it's during those hard, difficult, bad times, that's when Bob was at his best because he was bringing all kinds of funny stories that he would talk about. Thanks, Pensman. Thanks. Um, yeah, Bob to the Brewers like John to the Yankees. There are a
Absolutely.
few, I would say a very few iconic sportscasters that stayed with one team for a very long time. Like we all know Vin Scully too.
Yeah.
Yes. We all recognize like Harry Carey with the Cubs.
Although he
You
wasn't
know?
with although he wasn't with one team. He
No.
was with the Cardinals, he did the White Sox, and then he went over to the Cubs. I mean, if you want to talk about just one team, you know, Bob falls into that category with, I think the last guy you could probably say is closest to that. The last two guys now in baseball you could say are closest to that are Michael Kay with the Yankees and Tom Hamilton, who got inducted into the Hall, who was the most recent winner of the Ford Frick Award with the Cleveland Indians and Guardians.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So,
He
but
was
you're not
part
going
of
to find them anymore.
no, but he was also part of the team. Like when they made it to the playoffs, I think they got a bonus or something like that, and all the players of the team said, "We need to give a bonus
Bob.
to Bob because he was part of the team and he deserved it." And he donated all the money that they gave him. I read that. I'm like, because he didn't need the money, but um, he
No,
did live in Menominee Falls.
he did.
I can say that that's where I grew up. I know where the house is. I've been by the house. I have friends that trick or treated at his house.
That's just so Bob.
It is exactly. I will say that he had his health problems back in 2010. He announced he was going to miss 10 to 12 weeks of the 2010 baseball season because of having heart surgery. His aortic valve and portion of his aortic root were successfully replaced 4 days later. He returned to the broadcasting on July, and then he announced he would have to undergo more heart surgery during the off season. But he was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer in 2023, which most of us did not know. Like it's coming out now after the fact, and I'm
Yeah,
sure he told the close friends and stuff like that.
probably.
He did die in his home 10 days shy of his 91st birthday.
I think, you know, I mean, good for Bob, though, for this day and age, keeping that a secret from the general public, where everything nowadays you can't keep a secret. Where, you know, with social media and, you know, some random guy with a camera phone could be out in the backyard without anybody noticing and, you know, taping the whole thing, whatever, and posted it on TMZ. But good for him, though. I mean, but I heard a great story, too, about Rowdy Tellez, who was the first baseman for the Brewers for a few years, and then eventually he eventually departed. And then when he came back with the Pirates, the first thing he wanted to do upon coming back to Milwaukee was see Bob.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's just that kind of guy where, you know, the Brewers over the years have players, you know, we've seen them have players come and go. But when they return with their clubs, if they happen to be playing in a series against the Brewers, they always will want to go see Bob again. And then the great thing about it was, I remember in 2021, I was at the game when they clinched when the Brewers clinched the NL Central that year, and what was probably arguably just a crazy year all around for that team. Start off slow and then 12 wins in a row. 12 wins in a row. Willie Walkie, the three aces in the All-Star game, just an insane year. There, you know, Bob, when they won at home, after, you know, it was, ironically enough, it was against the Mets. You know, pop up, settles in Yelich's glove. The place goes nuts. And Bob goes out there, just flop, and for the photo after they won, flops right down and gets in the photo with them. I'm like, and the next thing you know, he's in the clubhouse shaking champagne. There's photos of him doing it, and I'm just like, and the comment section on social media, it's, how does he have all? He's 90 years old. How does he get all this energy?
I know. I was like, what? He's in there in the clubhouse playing. I mean, with all the champagne, you see all the pictures, but what you saw was the biggest smile.
Mm-hmm.
Like he he loved the Brewers. Let's be honest, because with all that he did, he could have gone to a bigger
Right.
market. He could have, and
Yeah,
he didn't.
easily.
He chose to stay with the Brewers.
Denny Matthews. Well, when you spoke of him with the Royals, he's had various offers to go places, including the Yankees. But he's kind of just stayed there because he's comfortable. I mean, Bob was like a Milwaukee institution. He, when the Brewers were going through that stretch there at post World Series where they had some pretty bad teams during that time. Like, I think one team ended up losing 110 games, and the only thing worthwhile watching was Jeff Cirillo win a batting title. But it was Bob who made people who were fans of that team tune in. And, he made it fun. There's a reason we call him the voice of the summer here.
Exactly.
He was, and he always, he was just one of the guys in that clubhouse. No matter what players kind of came and went, the one constant every year was Bob's going to be calling the game.
Yep. Bob's going to be here. I mean, yeah, exactly.
And Bob was, whenever Bob was taking a break, especially his earlier years, people are like, he'll be back. He's just saving himself for the postseason, for the stretch run. Because Bob always wanted the big game.
Exactly. One of the things I'm going to read what Christian Yelich wrote.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, "No words will really do you justice, but I kind of think that's how it should be. To say that you were one of one is probably an understatement. The stories you could tell, the life you lived, and the way you impacted people. I always cherished our time together and just being able to listen to you talk about your life and all you'd seen. I remember you saying that no matter how much time you have, it still never feels like enough. And that seems pretty true today. You'd always thank me for my friendship, but the truth of it is, the pleasure was all mine. I'll miss you, my friend." That says a lot about a player for a broadcaster.
There was a bond there. I mean, there's obviously a well-noted bond between Christian Yelich and Bob Uecker. I mean, that was a friendship there. I mean, obviously Yelich eventually they made him the franchise player and extended him for that long contract. I think it was the largest in the Brewers' history at that point in time. There was the bond there. It was very well noted, and they would talk all the time before the game. Bob would be on the field. Yelich would probably be off to the side in the dugout or whatever, and they would talk. It was a pure friendship between two different generations of baseball.
Right.
Probably a year or two, probably multiple generations of baseball kind of united in that point. I have a feeling that when the week goes on, I'm sure they'll have pictures in the store of Yelich and Uecker, probably in the team store of it. They're probably going to sell it for $1 bajillion because it was just two different generations bonded at that moment.
The Uecker family had put out a little tribute, and it said it when they announced it, and they said, "It is with heavy hearts that we mourn the passing of Bob. To many, he was an announcer and entertainer whose humor and voice transcended the game. But to us, he was so much more. Bob faced a private battle with small cell lung cancer since early 2023, which he met with the same strength and resilience that defined him. Even in the face of this challenge, his enthusiasm for life was always present, never allowing his spirit to falter. He brought joy to countless listeners through his wit, charisma, and love for baseball, Milwaukee, and all of Wisconsin, creating a legacy that will forever be cherished. While his contributions to the game are noteworthy, it is his kindness, humility, and love for family and friends that we will hold closest to our hearts. We are grateful for the outpouring of love and support during this difficult time as we grieve and celebrate the man we were so lucky to call ours." That was by the Uecker family. It's just, I would encourage any of you that don't really know him to go on YouTube, Google Bob Uecker. There's all kinds of different videos that have him in it, that talk about him. like you said, he didn't even have a signed contract. Like he just,
up
I don't
until
know.
up until the latter years, just because his acting union went under and he wanted his health benefits, so they made him sign a contract for the first time in his life.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bob Uecker handshake with either Bud Selig or later on when with the current owner Mark Antanasio. That was his job. He would be on the payroll and everything, broadcasting the games just by a handshake agreement.
Yes. I'm going to read one last tribute, and this is from Bud Selig himself.
Yeah.
I'm heartbroken with the loss of my dear lifelong friend, Bob Uecker. I can't begin to describe how much he meant to me, let alone what the loss is for Brewer fans, the state of Wisconsin, and countless others worldwide. Bob had the easiest way of making others feel at ease, share a laugh, and always left people feeling a little bit better. Nobody was his equal. I am so grateful that Bob's friendship was a constant presence throughout most of my life. For over 50 years, rarely did a day pass where we'd miss a conversation, a sharing of stories, and countless laughs. That cannot be replaced, and it is a giant loss, but I am lucky to have experienced that kind of enduring friendship. They wished so. Bob was on his second marriage, and had two kids that are alive. So they were wishing their condolences.
Yeah.
But what a difficult time for all of them.
Oh, it's hard. I mean, yeah. I mean, it doesn't get easier no matter it doesn't get easier no matter like how long they lived or what have you. I mean, it doesn't get any easier.
And Pensman, I don't think he was upset covering the Indians.
I doubt it.
He liked being in that movie. I think he just enjoyed sharing those laughs.
I doubt it, because that's what they were called forever. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else. I don't know what there would be to be upset at the time, because they were the Indians forever at that point.
Right. He just had a way that he could make everybody laugh.
He did.
And you went away from listening, even if now let's face it. So I have not hid the fact that I've been a Brewers fan all my life. Over 50 years. Yes, I'm that old. But
the beginning of Uecker.
Even if they lost, he had a way of still leaving you with, like, not that you were sad, but that you listened, that you didn't wait. Like sometimes, you listen to a game, and let's face it, the baseball, although they've shortened the time that the games are now, back 10, 15, 20 years ago, the games could last a long time. But you didn't feel like you wasted the time with him calling the games. It went so quick. That's the Pensman.
Oh yeah, I mean Brewers, there was. I mean, even as early as 5 years ago, the games lasted a pretty long time. I mean, I remember sometimes not leaving the ballpark till the middle of the night.
Right.
Which glad those days are over, thank God.
But listening to Bob, you wouldn't think it was that long. Like, it didn't seem like it was that long for the game, like, because with his storytelling, and I don't know. I just can't imagine listening to anybody else, really.
Neither can I, because that's what we all look forward to during the summer, was Bob Uecker would come back, whether it be he'd be getting ready for spring training, whatever, or you'd be going somewhere. Like me in general, I'd be out running errands or whatever, and he would be on, and there's not a game that goes by where he'd say something where you're just not where you're not laughing. And his stories, his knowledge of the game, he made it so fun. Especially remember once when Willie Adames, I recall this vividly. They were playing the Colorado Rockies. I was on my way to get a haircut, and Willie hits a 3-run home run. He does this goal, get up, get out of here. His call there, and he was kind of chastising Willie Adames for almost missing home plate, and kind of went on a little rant about it. And it was actually very funny. And I'm just in the car laughing, kind of shaking my head, saying, that's just Bob. And, he with whatever, no matter how, because the Brewers for the longest time, there was like a 20-year period there where they had some just awful teams, including 2002, 106 loss nightmare. But you listen because of Bob, because no matter how good or bad the Brewers were, because the baseball team's just a monopoly at that point, because, people are going to go watch. It's the summer. Everyone's going to go watch it no matter what. Bob made it fun. He made every baseball season worthwhile. I mean, it's like, people think we're crazy. People think baseball fans are crazy, thinking they go about 162 days a year thinking something good's going to happen. They keep on coming back, even though it might or might not happen.
Pensman, I think he loved that movie. I think it didn't matter if it was the Brewers. I think it couldn't have been the Brewers, because if you have watched the movie, then it wouldn't have made sense. Some of the fans in the stands, some of the iconic lines, they came from the Indians. And so I think he was just happy that it was filmed some in Milwaukee, and that it, that he was part of it. He just loved being involved, giving back to the community, and making all of us laugh. And that's what Major League did. It made us laugh. It showed us a side of baseball. And it was a feel-good story. Let's face it.
It kind of took you also to, I wouldn't say, I'm not sure how completely accurate it is, but it took you to what could happen on the field. Like, especially when, you get caught leaning and you're picking off and you know it. And obviously you go, oh, and then trying to get back and you don't.
Well, and sometimes trying to get in the head for some of these catchers, trying to get in the head of the batter and talking them into, swinging or not swinging. And I think that can happen. I know that as I played softball, and I know as I've talked and had conversations with my husband, Scott, he said that he used to do that all the time as a catcher too. So I think that part of it was funny, and what Uecker added to that whole scene, I can't imagine anybody else doing that scene.
I think the great thing about it was I think one of the more hilarious parts of that movie was when that the fictional Indians team was struggling along, losing game after game after game. Bob was getting drunker and drunker as it got on, and then eventually when Cleveland somehow got better and better, he got more sober and sober as it went on, and the hard alcohol in it started to lessen up, and next thing you know, he's just drinking either, I can't remember if it's lemonade or water, but he's not drinking anymore at that point, and it just was, and he looks a little more professional as it goes on as well. That was just that part of the movie was very funny.
It was. I do remember coming back to Milwaukee this past year. Yeah. We happened to be there. We did see Uecker. We happened to be there on the night that they had the Ryan Braun tribute.
Yeah.
So of course Uecker was there. Uecker, I have a picture of the two of them hugging Ryan Braun, and you could tell he had aged. I mean, but yeah, what a great man. Like, I don't know. This year, this summer of baseball and Brewers announcing is going to be very different, very awkward. I know that they're going to find good, like you said, who the replacement is already, that he's been doing it for a while. Yeah. Because Uecker obviously couldn't. I mean, he was 90. He couldn't be calling. He didn't travel. He didn't even call all the games at home during the last series. Yeah. But he called the last one.
Nah, for what I read, it took every fiber in him just to call that last game. I mean, you could just tell. I mean, obviously it's coming out now, but no one knew it at the time. And maybe some people knew, and probably it might have been some people within people within the Brewers, most likely, and maybe friends, but no one publicly knew that Bob was really going through all that up until now, which now, okay, it gets out, and okay, now we know, but but he still sounded the same. That was the great thing about Bob. You wouldn't even know he's having health problems, and he still sounds the same. And my lasting memory of him is 2021. The Brewers clinched the Central. this 88-year-old man goes flops down onto the field and gets in the team photo, and then is in the dugout even this year, shaking champagne with the players and doing everything involved with that celebration, which I'll forever say, where did you get this energy from?
Yeah, and I think I don't know that I can pinpoint it to just one memory. I mean, I can remember sitting in my grandparents in their backyard, listening to him call Brewer baseball games and listening to it with my family. I can remember going to the games and hearing him. I can remember there were a lot of times when now he did radio. I can remember a lot of times having the TV on and turning the TV sound off and putting the radio on because I only wanted to listen to him.
There was some people recall Game of the Week with Howard Cosell and Al Michaels. He did that for a long time when ABC was broadcasting baseball at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
He was, I recall, I remember just being in Wisconsin, that's how I got introduced to the Brewers. And I knew who they were, obviously, but didn't really know them just because being in Chicago, you just didn't hear about them that much. Now,
Right.
Obviously, that was before social media became what social media has become, because now the teams are significant. The teams are now significantly closer to you now, but at that time that was like an hour 50. That was like an hour 50 away from me, and I was a young kid at the time. Couldn't drive, so that to me that was far away. That seemed so far away.
Mm-hmm.
But when I came here, Bob was how I got introduced to it, and just whether it was when I was living in Madison or living in Milwaukee, whenever summer would hit, Bob would be, and eventually when I got a car, Bob would be on the radio whenever I'd be driving, whenever I'd be going on an errand or driving somewhere, or even the Brewers would be playing at night and I'd be heading back to Illinois, and I would try and keep the radio on as long as I could before I lose the signal once I crossed into Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or even when the radio was faulty, I would move up a little bit in traffic just to get the clear signal, just so I could hear Bob.
Yes. And for those of you,
obviously without hitting somebody, without hitting somebody, thank God.
Exactly. For those of you way back in the day when there was Miller Lite beer commercials,
Yeah.
and the usher went up to him and said, "Oh, Bob, we got to move you." And he's like, "Oh, good. You must be moving me to the front row." Of course, that was not the case, but it was just funny. And his lines, he could deliver his lines like nothing. I mean,
he could have done stand-up comedy if he wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
He could have been on Saturday Night Live full time, and it would have been awesome.
Yes, exactly.
Bob had a nice long life. He got his wish when he passed of still being, because one of his wishes was to still be employed when he passed, and because that's one of the things he said, where he's like, hopefully employed, and
Mm-hmm.
and he got that wish, because even if he had somehow still made it, I still think he would have had a game or two left in him. He would have found a way, knowing him. Even if although I don't think Bob really wanted the fanfare tour of a final season. I just don't see that him wanting that, because he knows he's loved. He very much knows that, and everyone knows everyone knows him. But I just don't think he wanted to deal with all that, and that's why he kind of kept it on the down low that, hey, I'm having some health problems here. And we find out about it now, because now the information's getting out there and whatever, and it's after the fact. So it's still a big deal, but not nearly as explosive as it would have been had it gotten out while he was still alive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah, Bob truly was like, I think he's the last of his kind in terms of broadcasters. Like, there's very few that have been with one team for so long, because now there's not really a real voice of a team anymore, just because there's so many different networks and radio stations that do it, that, there's not really like one voice. I think the only guys you can say who truly were the voice of a team now is Tom Hamilton, who with Cleveland, and Michael Kay with the Yankees. I mean, there's only like, there's a limited number of people in that category, and I think there's it's just something that's not going to exist anymore, just because we just have so many more places where you can listen to the game and watch the game.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And Bob, I think Bob, and probably you could probably make the same case for Vince. You could probably make the same case for Vince Scully. Were truly the last of their kind.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, his career spanned 70 years in baseball.
Yes.
Not just the 54 broadcasting, but he was a player too. So like he started out as playing, like, can you imagine having a career last 70 years like in the same industry? I mean, that's just unheard of. Unheard of.
It's hard to, it's, you know, no matter if you're a player or coach or manager or you work in the front office or you broadcast, it's hard to stay in the sport. It really is. It is very, very difficult because this game has a way of casting you aside and finding the next person. That's just the way the game is. You know, it was probably that way then, but more so now, because nowadays, you know, they're looking for, you know, cheaper options, save a little cash, whatever. But the fact Bob had this much longevity where, you know, the Brewers could have easily replaced them. You know, the game has a way of replacing those people, and it's happening more now than ever. But the fact they kept Bob there kind of speaks volumes of the organization and how much they knew how much he meant to the city. I'm sure the fiasco in Detroit of Ernie Hardwell might have factored in, but you know, Milwaukee could have done it and not blink twice, but they didn't.
Mark Antanasio, the principal owner of the Brewers, said it's going to be very hard not to see him the first day of spring training. Said Brewers principal owner Mark Antanasio, who was surprised to learn upon purchasing the team from the Selig family that Uecker never worked on a contract, preferring instead a handshake deal and the trust that he'd always come home. It's going to be very hard to go into the radio booth and not see him. It's going to be very hard to walk through that ballpark, American Family Field, and hear a voice calling the game that's not his.
Whenever you'd be in like the concession line at the ballpark, and you're like your back's away from the action, that's just the way the ballpark's laid out. You would hear the radio call of Bob Uecker surrounding you as you're in that line, so you wouldn't be missing a beat, and you would hear Bob. And every time you talk to, you know, the people who work at the stadium, great people, nice people, and you know, they would tell you how much of the game they saw, if any at all. But one thing they did tell you was like, "Oh, I was listening to the game." I was like, were you listening to Bob?" And they're like, "Yeah, I was listening to Bob," because, you know, Bob's like in Milwaukee. Whenever you say Bob, you think Bob Uecker. He's like known as a singular name, which is very, very hard to achieve.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like the same category, probably his own category, arguably, as you know Aaron as Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre as Brett, and you know, it's just there's only like, and probably when Prince Fielder was in Milwaukee, everybody knew Prince Fielder as Prince. You know, he got his own category as just a first name, and everyone knew who he was.
Yep. Oh yeah. It's just crazy. I mean,
he still made it this long. He was still yeah, I just think that I'm like, man, 90 plus years old. You still have all this energy somehow that probably most of the population doesn't have. And you're sliding. You're still young at heart. You're still doing crazy things like sliding into a team photo at the age of 88. You're popping champagne when the Brewers win and celebrating probably hard or equally as hard as just as hard or harder than some of the guys in that clubhouse. You know.
So Uecker's real broadcasting career began sometime during the 1971 season in Milwaukee. Bud Selig had led a group that bought the Seattle Pilots out of bankruptcy and moved them to County Stadium days before the 1970 season. But I did not know this. Later, he hired Uecker, not as a broadcaster. He hired him originally as a scout. but quickly scrapped that plan when a report arrived in the mail smothered in mashed potatoes and gravy. Selig swears that tale is true. So Selig moved Uecker to the radio booth with veteran broadcasters Merle Harmon and Tom Collins. Uecker started by providing color analysis, and as time went on, the two veterans urged him to expand his comfort zone. Uecker believes his first inning of solo play-by-play was at Yankee Stadium when Harmon and Collins abruptly stood and walked out of the booth in the fifth inning. Uecker held down the cough button and begged them to come back. They told him to call the game. Eventually, Uecker turned to the engineer and asked what he should do. I don't know, but you better start talking, came the response. There's one out already. The rest is broadcasting history for Bob Uecker.
I can just see that happening with Bob, just turning in a report and it's just a mess. I can just see it. I wouldn't doubt that from Seeley, because that's just something that Bob would do or would happen to Bob. And same with, but yeah, I mean, just being thrown into the fire like that. Talk about ooh, and then all of a sudden, well, here we are years later, and he's the voice of the Brewers, so it didn't really matter.
Well, and you think about another. I'm going to go back to this. 19 full-time and interim Brewer managers have sat with Uecker for the daily pregame radio show during his 54 plus years. So you think about how many different managers they've had, how many different personalities he's had to talk about. And, it's just too bad that in the 2024 National League Wildcard Series, when Uecker was at the stadium for all three games against the Mets, but opted to only call Game 3, a heartbreaker of a loss that flipped on Pete Alonso's home run off Milwaukee closer Devin Williams with 2 outs in the 9th inning. I'm telling you, Uecker said before signing off that night, that one had some sting to it. And this sting is going to last with most of us Brewer fans for a very long time. Losing Bob Uecker is a sting.
It's not going to be a normal year at the stadium, that's for sure. And the crazy thing too with eventually the former Brewer manager, and obviously he was a player. He's known Craig Counsell. He knew Craig Counsell since he was 7 years old.
Yes,
because Craig's dad worked in the Brewers in their community relations department.
Mm-hmm.
So just seeing that growth from a kid to eventually to a ball player, not a great ball player, but decent ball player, but who eventually came over to the Brewers like two different times because he's from Wisconsin. But seeing that growth, and also even this year with Pat Murphy, which there was a bond evident between him and Pat.
There was.
Which I was glad that Pat got the Manager of the Year award in Ueck's last year. I mean, obviously he was very deserving of it for this past year.
Yes. One of the things that Uecker had said, when I started broadcasting, it was in the major leagues, and I was scared to death.
Yeah.
But that's the way we did it, and it worked, Uecker said at his 90th birthday. The television stuff, the movie stuff, the different appearances, every time I did something, it was a first for me. It was fun. I had a good time, and I met a lot of different people in baseball and show business. Sometimes you say yes to something, and then you ask yourself later, why did I do this? But when you really think about the times you thought about saying no, but you said yes, it turned out to be something pretty good. Everything I've done has been pretty good. And I would argue pretty good.
That's an understatement.
Is an understatement. Exactly.
Because whatever he did, he excelled at it, whether it be movies or broadcasting or whatever, whatever he felt like doing. He was in the acting variety. He was great at it. Some people argue that, Bob could have probably had a career in Hollywood if he wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
He probably would have been up there with some of the great actors of the time and doing a comedy of some kind.
He could have, but his love besides family and friends was baseball.
Absolutely. Yeah, he had a very expansive baseball life.
He did. Well, Eric, anything else you want to talk about with Bob Uecker, Eric?
No, I think we covered it all. We have, we covered the trajectory of his career, his time, his time in Hollywood doing various movies, and even I didn't even know he was still an active actor into the new decade, doing shows that kind of relate more to what the other generation watches now. But that's just the amazing thing about him, was he was able to connect generations of people.
Yep. And he did Mr. Belvedere. He did lots.
Best known in Major League.
Exactly. Yes. Well, rest in peace, Mr. Baseball. You've earned your rest, and you will definitely be missed, is what I'm going to say.
Absolutely.
Eric, how can people find you or get a hold of you?
You can follow me on my Twitter at Sports Team News, or you can follow me follow my blog at bellyupsports.com, where I write all things baseball.
South Florida Tribune Publishing Company published a book. It's called Lessons from the Microphone, Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders. It is written by Scott Morganroth. He hosts a lot of shows on our network, including typically on Monday nights is our 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. It'll be back next week. But if you like to listen to podcasts, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you see the red subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share us, like us with everybody else. This book, Scott wrote, Lessons from the Microphone, talks about his 40 plus years in the media business himself and how it's changed. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Apple, and Google Books. Get your copy today. You can also go to our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. There's a whole plethora of great content. Go check it out. And then if you want to sponsor a show, you can call my husband Scott at 954-304-4941. Or if you want to advertise, you can do that too. If you have any show ideas or want to be a guest, you can always email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. With that being said, I think that's going to conclude this episode of Fire Up Wisconsin. Back to normal programming. Tuesdays, we talk Inside the Pigskin. So it's a football show. Wednesday nights, Sports Exchange. Thursday nights is typically Fire Up, and then Fire Up Florida, or the second episode of Fire or Sports Exchange of the week. It just depends on what we're talking about. So you got to stay tuned and watch the channel. All of our great programming. Eric, thank you so much for coming on tonight, and everybody that's been in the chat room, Ralph and George and Pensman and D-Lowe's and Highlighterman Sports and Pensman Sports, Pencilman Sports. Thank you all for joining and commenting. We appreciate everything. But most importantly, to all the Brewer fans, the state of Wisconsin, my condolences. Rest in peace, Bob Uecker. You gave us the best you had, and we enjoyed it, and we love you, and you will definitely be missed. Good night.